So I've skipped forward in time a little bit. So welcome to the 12 days of Ec 10. This was the original topic I meant to do on day 11, but I filmed it today and I'm going to post it ahead of time. So you'll see it appear before 7, 8, 9, and 10. And today's topic is open-ended questions. So it would be something like, name some reasons social surplus is a bad measure of welfare. And usually students do very poorly on these open-ended abstract questions, so I want to give you some tips specifically for dealing with them. And this is really not so much about economics, but really more about like logical thinking and psychological, the psychology of the mind. So it's not a lot of economics content. So if you want to skip this video, you can, but I do think it's worth watching because a lot of people's Aristotelian logic skills are rusty, and psychology is great to know anyway. So, a little bit of psychology background. We have something in teaching we call an expectation failure. And an expectation failure is where you expect something to happen based on your prior understanding of the world. So at t equal 1, time period 1, you form an expectation. And this is based on what you knew before you took the class. So if you were taking a physics class, you have some basic understanding of how gravity works, and you have some ability to like make guesses and predictions about whether a leaf or a bowling ball would fall quicker. And then at t equal 2, a good teacher will show you something that shows you're wrong. So let's say you find out you're wrong. Oh no. So in a physics class, this would be we'd create a vacuum and then drop a feather in a bowling ball, and you would see them fall at the exact same rate. And that's what Newton's model of gravity tells us should happen, but it's not what you probably expected coming into the class. So now we've created an expectation failure. You've seen that your intuitive understanding of the world before you took the class is wrong, and now you have motivation for like why you study physics, why you need to learn Newton's model. You need to learn it because if you don't, you will be wrong sometimes, and no one likes to be wrong. And we've seen this in Ec 10 repeatedly. On a lot of problem sets, you've seen questions that say, Professor A says does this, Professor B says does that, and usually you have an expectation that Professor A is correct. Professor A says there's a positive externality on deodorant, from deodorant, so we should subsidize it. And you say, that makes perfect sense. And then Professor B says, don't subsidize it, it's a waste. And you're like, that doesn't make sense, it goes against everything we learned in class and common sense. If something's good, you want to pay people to do more of it. But it turns out Professor B is right. So you get an expectation failure, and then you have to, explain to yourself, well, why was I wrong? Why is Professor A wrong when I expected him to be right? You also saw it on the Macrosoft problem on problem set 5. Monopolies are bad, right? That's our intuitive model. We form an expectation that Professor A, who supports monopolies, is probably wrong, and Professor B, who says break it up, is probably right. But then it turned out Professor A was right, and you had to think about, well, why was Professor A right? What's different, and what did my intuitive sort of view of the world leave out that this economic model can take into account? Be ready for questions like that on the test. If they ask you to explain who is right, it's probably the person you don't expect to be right. And what we're looking for is, can you understand why your intuitive expectation was wrong, and what it is about this guy's, that you thought was wrong that actually turns out to be right. I think there's a few examples like that on the old practice final exams. Usually just one per year, or sometimes not even one per year. Second rule is skip things where the marginal benefit is close to zero. If you see a problem that's really difficult and abstract and you don't even know where to start, then don't start. Just skip it. And the reason you want to skip it is actually not just because it's hard and you should avoid hard things. That's actually, not what you want to do. Avoidance is bad. So I'm not saying skip it and never come back to it. I'm saying read it carefully and then assess how difficult it is. Can you answer this question right now based on what you know, based on your sort of thought process at the time? And if you can't, if it's difficult and it's really abstract and it's a dumb question, like the one about the gas tax, or the one about, Eduardo Porter says middle-class families are doing poorly and, Bill Clinton is going to save us all. Just skip them because your brain will process it in the background while you work on other questions. This is a general psychological principle. When you see something hard and you can't do it all at once, you can, leave, do something else, and your brain will continue to process it. And what you'll find is sometimes when you come back to it, so when you skip it and then come back 30 minutes or an hour later, the answer just pops into your head. And the reason is your brain was thinking about it sort of in the background while you were doing all this other stuff. And that's a really powerful way to solve difficult problems. When you come up to something that you don't understand, read it carefully, start the wheels rolling, and then move on. And your brain will just continue working on it and chipping away at it. There's another reason you want to skip it, which is that if all else fails and you do run out of time, it's best to skip questions where you're not going to get a lot of points because you don't know the answer. You don't want to waste a lot of time on that difficult question and then not get the easy points on later blue books. That's just common sense, but it's a good thing to reinforce. All right, and then lastly, a lot of the time in Ec 10 and in other classes, probably not in math, but in any economics class, in a social science class like psychology, in a total bowl class that you take because you don't want to do real work like social studies, a lot of the time all you're really being asked to do is define terms. So if you can define the terms in the question, you basically often answered the entire question. And you'll get most of the credit on an Ec test for this. You'd get probably an A+ if you did this in social studies. So for instance, if a question asks you about, like, if a tax is regressive, just define regressive tax. That gets you halfway to the answer. Usually the answer will be obvious after you define your terms, or it'll still be really difficult, but you get like half or 2/3 credit. And the reason so the psychology behind this is by writing things out, so writing out definitions, you activate those circuits in your brain that are, related to those definitions. And by activating those circuits in your brain, you start to activate or make it easier to activate related circuits, so things that are associated with these definitions. And often, by activating all these associated words and getting your mind thinking about it, the key relationship between them all, or between what is being asked and what you're writing down as the definition, will become clear. So for instance, if I ask a question about, let's say it's about inequality, and I say, is the Gini coefficient going to go up or down when the poverty rate increases? That is a really stupid, hard question, because the answer is who knows, it's ambiguous. But if you just wrote out the Gini coefficient measures inequality, it goes up when inequality goes up, poverty is about being below a certain threshold of income, so if more people are in that really low threshold of income and have less money, now you've kind of related all the ideas. It probably occurs to you that it probably means that inequality is going up because poverty is going up, so probably the two went up together. And that probably wouldn't get full credit because it's not right, it's actually ambiguous, but is better than nothing by activating those related ideas. So let's do an example. A mandate, so this should to buy health insurance. A mandate to buy health insurance can help consumers. Explain what reference to asymmetric information. All right, so this question's hard, so let's just read it over. It's about asymmetric information. We know that there's 2 types of asymmetric information. I don't know. So I would skip this and come back 30 minutes later. So now we're back and it's 30 minutes later. Let's write out the things that we do know, that we have defined. We know asymmetric information. I don't have space to write this, but you'd write asymmetric information is where the buyer or seller knows more than the other one does. We know that there's 2 types. And since it's insurance, it's a pretty safe bet that it's adverse selection is the problem. So we'll go and define adverse selection. And now we have to think, what is it about forcing people to buy stuff that could be good for them? Our expectation is that forcing people to buy stuff they don't want to buy is going to be bad for them, but we know this problem is clearly creating an expectation failure. It wants us to explain why it can be good to force people to buy things. And it probably has something to do with fixing this asymmetric information problem. And this has been bouncing around in my head for 30 minutes, so now it occurs to me, hey, if we fix this problem, it's good. So that's probably what's good for consumers, that the mandate somehow fixes this adverse selection problem. And remember that adverse selection is about, now that we've written out the definition, it's when only the consumers who know they need the health insurance, so high risk, consumers buy the health insurance, and then the price is really high and no one else can afford it. If we force everyone to buy it, then everyone's pooled together. You don't have any adverse selection because you can't select. You don't have a choice. And that means there might be like lower prices because everyone's all pooled together. And then that's probably good for the consumers because now they're getting lower prices. So like, health insurance is cheaper. That's not a completely correct answer, but that probably got you 95% of the points. And it was a really difficult abstract question that barely gave you any hints. It's honestly a terrible question. You'd get something much better on the test. But you can see how just by jogging our memory about what is adverse selection, what is asymmetric information, remembering these are problems, and then thinking about, well, you can't select if you have a mandate, that got us most of the way to an answer. So you can see how these techniques together, expectation failures, skipping and processing in the background, and defining the terms, can be very powerful for getting a few extra points on the test. And in life, for any class, not just in Ec 10, but in life for figuring things out and for doing work in college, these are going to be powerful techniques. So to summarize, skip if it's hard, do the easy ones first, process the hard ones in your mind in the background, define your terms. If you start out by just writing out what the terms mean, it'll usually help activate related ideas and kind of get you halfway to an answer. And then third, sometimes intuition fails. That's why we have models. So remember, the goal of this class is that you're going to learn to do things you couldn't do without the class. So if you're operating purely on intuition, you're going to get things wrong sometimes. And we're going to show you how if you use the models and you use the techniques from class, you could have gotten the right answer. Thanks for watching our 11th day of the 12 days of Ec 10. We're very close to the test now, so if you have any questions, just please schedule a meeting or email or use Piazza, whatever works best for you.